Hello everybody, it's Sarah and I'm really sorry for not uploading on Sunday, but I had an exam on Monday. I also have an exam tomorrow actually, and it was just too much stress for me. I didn't feel like filming, and so that's why you didn't get a video on Sunday. However, now I am back, and I am back with a review, and that review is The Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Wang. This was the choice of my book club of Queens, Witches and Valkyries, where we read one adult high fantasy book written by a woman per month, and I always put up a poll on Twitter in the middle, around the middle of the previous month, with 4 choices of books, and for January The Sword of Kaigen won. By the way, if you want to join us, all the links, Twitter, Discord, everything are in the description box down below, so go and check those out. And also the buddy read for February is Empress of Salt and Fortune by Nivo. So yeah, if you're interested in that, go and check the links out. But today we're going to talk about this book, and man, like 2021 in terms of buddy reads started out really well, because I love this book. I'm not rating books in 2021 aside from 5 stars, and this was a 5-star. This book destroyed me. It's so good. But before we get into the positives and negatives, which overwhelmingly are positives, let's first talk about what this book is actually about. So this is an Eastern Asian inspired military kind of fantasy, and it's set in this world that as a whole actually is quite modern. So you already have TVs and you have radios and you have holograms, one or the other, like, you know, these pictures thingies and everything. However, this is set in a peninsula of this country that is still very traditional, that don't have a lot of technology, and that very much still value like old warrior traditions, spirits, and so on. Also, people in this world, or at least a lot of people in this world, kind of are bender types, so they have like different powers connected to different elements, which is really cool. And the main story of this book follows 2 characters. One is Misaki and the other one is Mamoru, her son. And you follow these 2 characters, see a little bit of their daily lives at the beginning, and then you follow them as their village is attacked, and during the attack and after the attack. And yeah, that's basically what the story is about, the attack on their village and how these 2 characters deal with it. Now, as for my thoughts on this, as for my review on this is of course as always going to be spoiler free, so do not worry if you haven't read this book yet. This review is purely based on the fact that I want to convince you to read this book, because this book is so good. But as always, let's start with the negatives. And the first negative I have is a little bit of a nitpick, and that was the use of Japanese within this book. Which, before you click away, I very much am someone, I appreciate the use of different languages within books, but it kind of matters how it is used. And I wouldn't have minded if Japanese was used in this book. However, the way it was used was there were just random phrases of Japanese thrown in with no sense at all. And basically you had one sentence in English, then you had one sentence in Japanese. But within the book, within the story of the book, the 2 characters were still talking in the same language, which, you know, just kind of pulls me out of the story, especially since you do have characters within this book that do talk different languages. So for example, you could have, I don't know, when you have 2 different characters who meet and who talk different languages, you could have one of the characters say the first sentence they say to each other in Japanese to make sure that the reader now knows that it's a different language being spoken. However, that wasn't the case. It was just random phrases of Japanese thrown in there, which, you know, just kind of pulled me out of the story a little bit. Wasn't the biggest fan of that. But then maybe also as an example to show where I do appreciate the use of non-English languages in books. Also, a lot of the familial terms within this book, like when characters directly spoke to each other, were Japanese familial terms. So, ka-sama, to-sama, ni-sama, ni-sama, those terms that we know from anime, at least those of us who watch a lot of anime. And I do very much appreciate that. I think that very pointed use of different languages can help you immerse yourself in the story. At least it did with me. And for example, familial phrases are something that I personally think is very culturally loaded and that sometimes wouldn't even make sense to translate. So there I appreciated it, but the random stuff didn't appreciate so much, kind of pulled me out of the story a little bit. But I have to say it only was really used at the very beginning of the book. So, you know, after some time it doesn't happen anymore and I kind of forgot about it. Then the second negative thing, and this is the last negative thing that I have, is the last chapter. The last chapter felt kind of unnecessary, gotta be honest. And the reason why it felt like that is, first of all, it was double or triple the size of any of the other chapters, and then also it didn't really feel like it had anything to do with the main story anymore. It felt like the main story kind of had already ended, everything was over, and the only reason this last chapter existed is to kind of connect this book, which is a standalone, to the other books within this world that the author has already written that is a series, and that I think are YA books. This is adult fantasy, by the way. So yeah, although it's obvious it's adult fantasy because in my book club we only read adult fantasy. But anyway, so the last chapter was kind of unnecessary. I mean, it was interesting and it kind of did make me want to pick up some of the other books within this world maybe, but in terms of adding anything to this story, wasn't really the case and was pretty unnecessary. Now, in terms of positive stuff, it's gonna sound like there's less positive stuff than negative stuff, but that's mostly because all the positive stuff just kind of wraps together, because it's just, oh my god, I cannot even specifically say what is so amazing about this book, but I just love everything about it. I love the world building. I thought it was really interesting having this very traditional like culture within the place that we're at in this world, but at the same time the world as a whole being a very modern world. I thought there were so many interesting contrasts there. There were a lot of themes around change and growth and characters accepting who they are and finding who they are, and like finding who you want to be, what you want to stand for, what you want to fight for. And I absolutely loved those themes. They worked so well with the way the characters were written. The characters were, oh my god, I instantly fell in love with the characters. There were some characters that I didn't like as much at the very beginning, but those were mostly side characters. And it was less that I didn't like the characters themselves, but more that I didn't like how the characters acted. But aside from that, Misaki is such a strong and unique female character. And I mean, if you've been on my channel for a while, you will know that my favorite type of character, especially within fantasy, is a mother fighting for her child. And Misaki is that. And there's so many regrets she has and so much she has to deal with in the last half of the book, or last third of the book, that, oh my god, I just loved it so much. But then there's also so many, not even directly connected to the characters, but there's also so many themes around the world as you know it falling apart. And not just in terms of there's now a physical attack on your village, on everything you know, but also in terms of ideologically that everything you thought you believed in was a lie. And oh my god, so good. It was so good. I loved it so much. But then the last thing are the emotions within this book. Like, oh my god, I wanted to say I can't remember the last time I felt this much when reading a book, but actually I can remember the last time I felt this much when reading a book, and it was almost exactly a year ago when I read The Song of Achilles. Because, like, both of these books are books that absolutely rip out your heart. There's so much heartbreak when reading this book, and it's not just like a lot of books have that it's just like one punch and you start crying and that's it. No, there's like 200 to 300 pages of just continuous heartbreak. And when I finished this book, I've read the second half of the book pretty much in one go. I cried throughout the book. Not completely. I stopped crying. There were like moments when I was like, okay, I'm fine now. It's like I caught myself, like my emotions are under wrap again, but no. 2 pages later I started sobbing again. And I cry a lot in books, but I don't sob a lot when reading books. And this book definitely made me sob a lot. And yeah, I want to find a way to like convince you to read this book, but I don't know how, because I don't know, there's not that much concrete I can say that wouldn't be spoilers or wouldn't be considered spoilers. I can just say that the way this story was built was absolutely unique as far as fantasy I have read so far and standalone fantasy I have read so far. Because quite often when you have a fantasy story, especially when you have standalones, you kind of have a beginning where, you know, you have the introduction to the world, to the characters and so on. And then you start building towards the climax and towards the fight. And then the fight is over and it's just like, yay, everyone is happy. However, what this book does is that a third of the book takes place in one day, which is the attack on the village. But then the last third on the book is like no longer the attack, but like all the characters dealing with, you know, all the problems that come now because of the attack. And I won't tell you if the attack ends good or badly or whatever, just like, you know, the last third of the book is dealing with the fallout of the attack. And I thought that was a very interesting decision to make, because a lot of times we think it's quite boring dealing with the fallout, but that wasn't the case in this book. And it also was the main reason why I cried so much, because, you know, the last page dealing with the fallout was also dealing with a lot of grief. And I won't say in which way the grief was, because, you know, there's different types of grief. But yeah, it was very interesting. And I think if this decision wasn't made to deal with the fallout of this attack so in depth, I think this book wouldn't have as much of an emotional impact, gotta be honest. And so yeah, I have never read a book like this, so that alone makes me want to recommend it to everyone and shout it off of the rooftops that everyone has got to go read this book. I've been meaning to read this book since 2019 and I am so happy that I finally picked it up. And honestly, I regret that it took me this long to pick it up. But anyway, with that said, that was it for this video. If you have read The Sword of Kaigen, tell me in the comments down below. If you're interested in picking it up, also tell me in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, maybe think about giving me a thumbs up and also maybe subscribing. All the links to my social media are in the description box down below, so go and check those out. As I have already said, all the links to my book club are also in the description box down below, so go and check those out as well. And I hope I'll see you soon. Bye!